Thank you. Last time I gave a talk on this subject, I fainted. So I hope I've got this. I can lean on this, can't I? This time. That was actually a Vajra Buddhist talk at one of the LBC Sifford retreats that they run over Christmas time. It's quite dramatic. It's a similar story that I'm telling this time, although many years on. So I've been asked to speak about my personal experience of spiritual death and rebirth. So I'm going to do it from that perspective, and about a particularly significant experience of that that occurred to me about 11 years ago. And I'm going to try and draw out some principles from that experience that hopefully are relevant to all of us. And I'll also mention a couple of practices that I do in connection with spiritual death and rebirth. And I'm thinking of it more broadly than meditation practice when I talk about that. So I know, of course, we've got the system of meditation. We've also got the 5 great stages where those same 5 stages are applied sort of to spiritual life more broadly. And they're talked about as vision and transformation by Bhante in the Precious Garland seminar, I think. So I'm talking in that broader sense, outside of meditation. So of course one has to try and define what I mean by spiritual death and rebirth. For me, of course, spiritual life is all about the cultivation of the mind, isn't it? It's cultivation of the heart, the mind, the body, consciousness, and so spiritual death is the death of the old mind, the old values, the old conditioning, and spiritual rebirth. Here I'm talking about as the birth of the new mind, the new values and the new consciousness, of course taking all the way up to enlightened consciousness itself. But I definitely see it as a continuous and incremental process. I'm clear I've had an experience of spiritual death rebirth. I'm sure you all have too. And then, as we're all familiar with, there's a continuous sort of incremental or experience, I think, all the way up to, I have confidence, all the way up to Buddhahood. So I'm going to talk about the most significant experience on a particular day in June 1999, and of course, just to add, of course, what we're talking about here is change, isn't it? We talk a lot about change. We're talking about change from the old to the new, and it's very interesting at the moment. There's a lot of demonstrations, aren't there, around the world, anti-capitalist demonstrations. There's one very notable one around St Paul's Cathedral, which I used to work just a few minutes walk from St Paul's Cathedral, and as you'll see in a minute, and it's interesting because 12 to 15 years ago I would have been one of the people they were protesting against, and now I'm more likely to be in the camp, if you like. So this is it's interesting. I think it's quite topical, you could say as well. So Saturday the 12th of June 1999, 11.5 years ago. First, I'll just tell you about the 2 weeks leading up to that day. I'd resigned from my job at JP Morgan, which is an American investment bank. I was a bond dealer working on the trading floor there, and doing very well there. I'll come on to that in a second. But it was something I'd really wanted. I mean, from childhood, I'd wanted to be a millionaire. Much to the, the disgustor with my grandfather, who was a very civic-minded man and gave his life to local government and was knighted for it, actually. And he was appalled when I said I wanted to be a millionaire. It wasn't the only thing he was appalled about in me. Anyway, so I'd worked really hard to get this job in the city. Point of story, it didn't come out of nowhere. As we know, things arise dependent on conditions. And I'd studied economics at Cambridge, and from there it was, quite a sort of natural step. That was a good setup to get this job in the city, and I did well there. I was very clear of my goals. I wanted a Porsche. It's very cliched, I know, but I wanted a Porsche 911 Targa, which is the one with the glass roof, silver. I was very clear about that, and so I was doing well. I got my first proper bonus that year I left. I might as well say, I earned £70,000. I was only 25. So that's quite a lot of money, isn't it, for a 25-year-old, £70,000? And this is 11 years ago too, worth a lot more. So, and when I resigned, they told me, well, what you do, you'll be earning $1 million a year in a couple of years. So by now, or by 28, I would have been earning $1 million a year. So it's a very different world to the one we're used to, of sort of bright lights with support, 40 quid a week, whatever. So that was what I just resigned from, and you might be wondering why. It was, of course, because of the Dharma. I'd learned to meditate in Kathmandu thanks to Moga Chitta and Moga Vajra, who were running classes there, and I then got involved in the LBC and started going to classes there, joined a study group, so forth. And what I really noticed, especially, retreats. You hear this so many times, don't you, in talks? But the retreats were the key thing, where I really got an experience of my mind, and therefore the world, in a much more vivid and real and alive sense. And what I noticed was when I got back to the trading floor, I'd see that mindfulness, that awareness sort of unwind. Even from morning to evening, and certainly after getting back from retreat. And I found this increasingly painful. And I also started to wonder what I was actually producing. There was nothing tangible that I was producing. I was basically doing transactions all day long in the bond markets, but it wasn't any tangible product from that. So I even started having fancies, maybe I should work in a factory or something. At least I'd be producing something, Yes. So I went and spent a week at Windhorse, to whom I'm very grateful, because that showed me, if you like, another life was possible, another working life was possible. And I decided to go to Windhorse. But in the meantime, I was going to do a Karanar appeal. Even at that stage, I did realise I was the beneficiary of a lot, and it was possibly time to give something back. So anyway, so still in this 2-week build-up time, I left the job. Then it was Wesak Buddha Day weekend at the LBC. Bante came and gave a talk on gratitude at the Bishopsgate Institute. Some of you might remember that. And he had dinner with us, with our study group, Maitreya Bandhu's study group. And then I went straight off to... Oh, that's right. And I moved out of my flat that weekend in Hampstead, which is a very posh part of London, very nice, next to the Heath. And then I went on my first solitary retreat. This was for 9 days in Spain. And that was very good, very intense, but very good. So it was quite an intensive couple of weeks. Then I came off my solitary retreat and did something that I'll never do again. So I phoned my girlfriend right at the end of the retreat from a phone box at the hill at the bottom of the Alhambra in Granada, and she told me that she was leaving me for her old boyfriend. I can't blame her in retrospect, because what I was doing was pretty alarming. Because she worked for the same bank actually. So that was a real shock, and I got back to London to the appeal house, right? And it was actually before the appeal started. The appeal was starting on Saturday. I got there on Friday. And appeal houses are very variable. This was one of the worst. This was in Finsbury Park, which is not a nice part of London. It was placed directly between railway lines and a primary school. It was a student house. It was filthy and dreadfully decorated, and just awful in every way. And here I was in this house on my own, except for a guy from Manchester who I had almost nothing in common with, as far as I could tell. Lovely guy, but and here I was in this house. So that was a shock. My girlfriend just broken up with me. Everything. I left my flat, my career, and here I was in this house in Finsbury Park. The next morning, I woke up and this is the day, the Saturday. I was in a really kind of shocking state. I didn't know what. I was shattered, really. I was just wondering, what have I done? It was in this house. I didn't even have any bedding. Like, I was lying on a bare mattress with a duvet. I couldn't even hide under the duvet. Maybe there wasn't even a duvet. I was like, there wasn't even like that. Just nothing. I was shattered. And what was interesting was that I knew I had to phone someone. And what was very interesting is that I didn't actually phone my university or banking friends. I phoned people from the study group, actually. Maitreya Bandhu, Satyadaya, who's here, a guy called Lawrence Leeson. And I thought that was very interesting because I hardly knew them in comparison. But anyway, that was obviously my feeling. I'm in trouble here. None of them could help. I don't know what they could have done that would have helped anyway. But I in a way, none of them actually were able to kind of put me up or anything. So I was left here, still back with just this bare mattress in this grassy house, And what happened then? Oh, that's my parents, right? I'll call my parents. Okay. If there's one person you always rely on, it's your mum, right? And they are very good, my parents. Still very supportive. But I phoned them up and I said, look, God, I'm in real trouble. Can I come and stay this weekend? You know, I got nothing up it. They said, oh, we've got guests this weekend. The whole house is absolutely full. There's no way we could put you up. And and then I really was on my own. You know, when even your parents say no, then you've you've had it. And for me, this was it was really shattering. There was absolutely nowhere I could turn. There was nothing to rely on. I had nothing. All the things that made up my identity, my job, and the money that went with that, my girlfriend, my home, sort of friends or parents. I just felt completely on my own. And yeah, I mean, I'm not somebody who cries very often. I cried. I walked down the street, this road, Woodstock Road, where the house was, just wearing sunglasses, sort of try and hide my tears. I was embarrassed, but just really shattered. Didn't know what to do. And in retrospect, I can see. I think this was spiritual death. I was actually facing the experience that I guess we all face on our deathbed, where there's nothing to turn to in a way. We can't even rely on our own bodies. I mean, at least my body was in good health and so forth. But otherwise, there's nothing. There's nothing that we can turn to, as we know. We use the word refuge. There's no refuge that we can find from reality, from essenceless reality and changing reality. And I think for me that was quite shattering. So I'll come on to what happened next in a second. But I just wanted to draw out the principles that I think one can take about spiritual death from this story. I think that emptiness, if you like, that emptiness of reality, it could either be an intentional turning towards, as we know, we do this in the 6 element practice and in other practices, or in this case, unintentional. I didn't plan for that Saturday morning. I did choose to make all those other choices, but I had no idea of the consequence. I didn't really think it through. I didn't think, nowadays someone would say, hold on, Amalavajra, you're going to leave your job and your girlfriend and your flat and do all at once over one weekend. Is that sensible? Is that going to be a bit much? No, I didn't have that conversation with anyone, so I just did it. And so we could consciously kind of create the situations. In a sense we do. This is what we talk about, is going forth, isn't it? We go forth from our refuges. And it can happen unintentionally, of course, when bad health hits us or a close friend dies and so forth. Those situations when reality hits us. I mean, we've had that in the order. I've certainly had that with a couple of friends, with Manjusra this summer and Adarsha a few years ago. I think the principle we can draw out is that we're basically turning towards the experience of spiritual death. Rather, is we're opening up to essenceless, changing reality, the void, shunyata, our emptiness, and that's what I think I was in touch with that day, that morning, without meaning to. Okay. And I think another part of that, and this is something Subhuti drew out last week in a talk, is there's a kind of bewilderment, I think, as a characteristic of spiritual death. These kind of questions, like, what is going on here? What is happening here? I don't know if you have these moments where you sort of might look up at the sky and think, and you suddenly remember, oh yes, we're floating on this large mass of earth and water and air through limitless voidness. That is actually happening. That's like, and that's bewildering. I mean, how do we make sense of that? Who am I? I mean, this is a question that comes to me sometimes at these moments. How did this happen? How am I standing up here talking to you? I didn't decide 11 years ago to put on a pink shirt and a white case and come. Like, how did this happen? And who exactly is doing this? I mean, in a sense, I'm doing it, but not really. I mean, these words are coming, but I'm not really quite choosing to say them. So I think those are the kind of questions, that kind of positive bewilderment that can come in these moments of spiritual death. And I say they can be unintentional, but I think we can also create those moments. And again, I'll come back to that later when I talk about practices that we can do. Okay, so next, spiritual rebirth. What happened next after this Saturday morning, this shattering Saturday morning? Well, that evening, people started to arrive for the appeal, right? Jairaj and Manjika, other people came. And someone said, let's go and see the Matrix. I think it was about the fifth time Andrew had seen it. He really loved it, and I hadn't seen it, so went to the emotion. Now I know some people say it's pure Dharma, and and I know a lot of people think that's absolute nonsense. I'm not going to claim it's pure Dharma, but it had a massive effect on me after that day. I mean, it's it's a pretty spectacular film, and I think that, and of course there is some, as in, well, anyway, I think there is some truth in it. And as I came out of that film, and I found myself again walking up that same Woodstock road without the sunglasses, it was dark. I was in a state of heightened awareness. I mean, everything was hyper real. I remember distinctly looking at the shrubs in some of the front gardens and just being amazed by the beauty of the flowers and the shrubs that were there in these gardens. I was doing something that I very rarely do. Just absolutely absorbed and delighting in the world around me as I walked along the street that night. And then what followed? Well, I mean, then of course the appeal started the next day, and really the whole of my sort of life has kind of come from that point. I mean, I discovered something in fundraising, door-to-door fundraising as a practice, as a spiritual practice, that has completely changed my life. Thanks to Jaraja, sit over there. I mean, it's very. I still find it, even after 12 years, hard to say why door-to-door fundraising is such a strong practice. But what it brought me in touch with, the values that emerged, or the new self that emerged, was a self that delighted in an aliveness, a genuine, truthful connection with others, a truthful expression of myself and communication with others, an ambition. Of course, ambition had always been there, but here was an ambition directed to something meaningful. Raising money for people in desperate straits, 1,000 miles away. That that's a higher value. So yeah, those were those is as though those were the things that came alive. And although I'd been due to join Windhorse within a couple of weeks, I knew this is what I have to do. And I distinctly remember going for a walk with George and saying, I want to come work at Caranock. I'd only been there 2 weeks on appeal as a volunteer for 2 weeks. I want to come and do this all the time. And thought I could start, straight away. And she'd start straight away. So yeah, that was in a way the rebirth the spiritual rebirth it started from that Saturday, but it's been of course it's a continuous process. But what I've found in door-to-door fundraising is a way of expressing those values, those higher values, in a way that that transforms me and hopefully to some extent the world around me. I think in terms of the principles I take out of that experience, I think I'm very interested in this idea of it that there's no effort involved. That spiritual rebirth sort of takes place almost kind of spontaneously, just as the lotus in our sadhana kind of blooms in the blue sky. It's almost like you just kind of create the blue sky and the lotus just blossoms. Well, just so you have this experience of spiritual death, and the rebirth, the new consciousness, the new mind, the new values, the new self, almost seems to sort of almost happen without effort. I mean, Subuti's been talking in terms of that's where the Dharma Nirma, the order of conditionality knows the Dharma Nirma comes into effect. We've done all the hard work. We've done the integration, the positive emotion, all those practices that we've done. I mean, it's not going to happen without that. I think those are a precursor. As we know, it's not that you just face death and immediately there's rebirth. There needs to have been the kind of graft ahead of time. So that's one principle, I think, is this idea of it being, you get it in the Pali Canon, in the Anguttara Nikaya. It's not it's a natural law, not an effort of will. We talk about the spiral path like that. I think that's my view on how spiritual rebirth happens. Again, there's nothing we can do, and I'll come back to practices in a second. So yeah, it's almost like, again, to use another Pali kind of metaphor, it's as though there's the snake's skin is shed, the old self is shed, and then it just reveals this new self. Okay, so I'll talk now a little bit about a couple of practices that I do to try and cultivate this, because I realised a few years ago that I was slightly using Buddhism as just a sort of positive self-development tool. I was meditating, practicing ethics, so forth. Almost, it's the usual thing about cultivating a happy, healthy self. But actually, that's not really what we're about here, and it's not why I gave up the Porsche. I want that kind of radical turning towards reality that transforms consciousness eventually to enlightened consciousness. That's why I'm doing this. It's not worth it otherwise. Well, let's leave it. Yeah, let's say that. So I actively been trying to cultivate these practices of cultivating spiritual death and rebirth. And my main, they're very simple, to be honest. I mean, the one for spiritual death is so simple. And this may not apply to all of you, I'm aware, but if you're someone like me who's very kind of driven, really, for me it's just stopping. That is the practice, and I find it very, very challenging indeed. It's the hardest practice I do, to just stop, to just say, right, do nothing for 10 minutes. Just sit in a chair and do nothing for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Some of you are thinking, well, I can do that easily. Fine, this one isn't for you then. But for me, that is one of the strongest practices that's the strongest practice that I do in this area, because once I do that, of course, the mind, wants to do stuff, hold on, we've got to do something. No, just sit here. And I time it on my watch, actually. I sit there with a stopwatch and say, no, you're not getting up for 15 minutes, not till 5 past. And then what happens is suddenly then I open up. Out of that discomfort, that kind of boredom, that restlessness, suddenly I start to notice everything that's around me. I notice the world, and I notice the reality of the situation that I'm in, which is somehow I'm in this body of this kind of mind, and there's something going on which I don't quite know what it is, and suddenly I'm into that, rather than just being in finishing this email or finishing this letter. So that's the big practice. That's the practice I do. I mean, traffic lights are brilliant for this. I cycle a lot in London, and of course, like most cyclists, I just want to jump the traffic lights, but actually the traffic lights are brilliant. That's a little moment of practice. I've got nothing to do for 30 seconds or a minute. I have these little moments even sometimes then. That's the main one I want to talk about for spiritual death. For spiritual rebirth, I mean, I'm doing something that's, this is all, I'm sure you're familiar with this kind of stuff, but really inspired by the imagination paper, really dwelling on beauty. So again, something I'll do is actually positively try and dwell on beauty, be it in nature or music is the other big one for me. I'm trying to pay attention. I'm trying to read more poetry. I'm trying to pay attention to dreams, and of course, I'm trying to be faithful to Tara and my sadhana practice each day. Often chant the mantra as well during the daytime. That's my connection with the enlightened mind, if you like. And what I do to make sure I'm on track is I keep a checklist. Every day, at the end of each day, not every day, it's supposed to be every day, I go through, I've got the 5 stages of the kind of checklist, and then different practices that I do underneath each stage, and I give myself, again, traffic lights, green, amber or red, depending on how I did that day in that area, and then a little comment if it's relevant. So that's what I do, and it really works. It's something I used to do in triathlon training years ago, and it really works, because then I realise when I'm losing track of particular areas I'm just not paying attention to, and for me those are particularly these 2 areas actually, stopping and noticing beauty. Yeah, those are the ones that I can get very sort of utilitarian. So yeah, I do recommend that that approach. So yeah, there it is. Spiritual death and spiritual rebirth. Hopefully you got something from my story on that day on Saturday, 12th of June, 1999. Which was certainly the strongest experience I've had, and particularly I hope I've been able to draw out some of the principles that came out that might be relevant for you about this sort of positive bewilderment that can happen in that moment of spiritual death. Like, what is going on here? Who am I? What is this reality? This changing reality, and then in spiritual rebirth, this kind of quite natural blossoming that can happen once we've created the space. Through facing reality. And I feel very confident that those, I was going to say small experiences, that experience in 1999 was not small, but the smaller ones that have happened since, that they will continue to happen throughout life and gradually build towards actually seeing reality more and more truly, and the consciousness that arises being closer and closer to that of the Buddhas. Thank you.